The sky bled hues of amber and crimson as dawn crept over the sprawling urban decay of a forgotten American city. Among the rusted cars and crumbling concrete of a derelict underpass, a small fire crackled within a battered metal barrel, its warmth casting flickering shadows on the weathered face of a man seated nearby. His name was Thomas Kane, though few cared to ask, and fewer still knew the weight of his past. His military jacket, faded and patched, bore the scars of campaigns fought half a world away, and his eyes carried a weariness that spoke of battles, both external and internal. Kane sipped weak coffee from a tin can, his hand steady despite the chill in the air. Around him the city stirred to life, a symphony of distant sirens, barking dogs, and the occasional screech of tires. For Kane, this was home, a transient, gritty existence that offered little in the way of comfort, but much in the way of anonymity. He was content to let the world pass him by, unbothered and unnoticed. But the world, as it often does, had other plans. Across the street, three men emerged from an alley, their laughter loud and their movements brash. They wore the telltale uniforms of street predators, sagging jeans, oversized hoodies, and sneakers that gleamed unnaturally clean. Their swagger was deliberate, their intent unmistakable as they locked eyes on Kane. One of them, a wiry figure with a shaved head and a serpent tattoo coiled around his neck, gestured toward the veteran. "Hey, look at this guy," the wiry man sneered, his voice carrying over the morning's ambient noise. "What you got in that can, old man? Gold?" The others laughed, a chorus of mockery that grated against the stillness of Kane's solitude. He didn't respond, keeping his gaze fixed on the fire. He'd learned long ago that acknowledgement often fueled the fire of aggression. "He's ignoring us," said another, a bulky figure with a scar cutting across his cheek. "Maybe he thinks he's too good to talk." "Nah," said the third, a younger man with a perpetual smirk. "I think he's just scared. Ain't that right, Gramps? You scared of us." Kane's hands tightened around the tin can, but his expression remained neutral. He'd faced down insurgents, outmaneuvered death itself in the arid wastelands of foreign wars. He wasn't scared, but he wasn't looking for trouble either. The wiry man took a step closer, his shadow falling over Kane. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Don't you know it's rude to ignore people?" Kane slowly raised his eyes, meeting the man's gaze with a calmness that unnerved him. "Move along," Kane said quietly, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not looking for any trouble." "Trouble?" The man's grin widened, revealing yellowed teeth. "Oh, we're not trouble. We're your new friends. Thought maybe we'd share some of that coffee you got there." "It's not much," Kane replied, returning his gaze to the fire. "Wouldn't be worth your time." The scarred man chuckled, stepping closer. "We'll be the judge of that." Before Kane could react, the wiry man kicked the metal barrel, sending embers and ash scattering. The fire died instantly, leaving a cold void in its wake. Kane's jaw tightened as he slowly stood, his movements deliberate and controlled. He towered over the men, his broad shoulders and muscular frame a silent testament to years of discipline and training. "Last chance," Kane said, his voice low and measured. "Walk away." The younger man laughed, pulling a switchblade from his pocket. The blade glinted in the pale morning light as he flipped it open with practiced ease. "Or what, old man? You gonna lecture us to death?" In an instant, the dynamic shifted. The younger man lunged forward, aiming the blade at Kane's chest, but Kane's body reacted faster than thought. Years of military training taking over, he sidestepped the attack, his hand shooting out to grab the younger man's wrist. With a quick twist, he disarmed him, sending the blade clattering to the ground. The move was seamless, almost effortless, but it carried a precision that spoke of a soldier's mastery. The younger man cried out in pain, falling to his knees. As Kane released him, the other two hesitated, their bravado faltering in the face of this unexpected display. "I told you," Kane said, his voice calm but firm. "Walk away," the scarred man growled, pulling a crowbar from his hoodie. "You think you're tough, huh? Let's see how tough you really are." He swung the crowbar with brute force, but Kane was ready. He ducked under the arc of the swing, stepping inside the man's reach. Using the momentum against him, Kane delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs, followed by a swift kick to his knee. The scarred man collapsed, gasping for air. The wiry man, now visibly shaken, pulled a handgun from his waistband. His hands trembled. As he aimed it at Kane, his bravado replaced by fear. "Stay back! I'll shoot!" Kane's eyes locked onto the weapon, assessing the threat with practiced precision. He took a slow step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. "You don't want to do that," he said, his tone steady. "Put the gun down before someone gets hurt." "I'm warning you," the wiry man shouted, his voice cracking. "No," Kane replied, his voice dropping to a chilling calm. "I'm warning you." The wiry man's resolve wavered, and in that split second, Kane closed the distance. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it sharply to disarm him. The gun fell to the ground as Kane delivered a precise strike to the man's solar plexus, leaving him doubled over and gasping for air. The three men lay scattered on the ground, groaning in pain. Kane stood over them, his breath steady and his gaze unwavering. He reached down, picking up the discarded handgun and ejecting the magazine before tossing it into the gutter. "Go home," Kane said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And don't come back." The men scrambled to their feet, their arrogance shattered. They limped away, casting fearful glances over their shoulders as they disappeared into the shadows of the city. Kane watched them go, his expression unreadable. He turned back to the smoldering remains of his fire, kneeling to gather the scattered embers. The city continued to wake around him, oblivious to the confrontation that had just unfolded. But for Kane, the tranquility of the morning had been irrevocably shattered. He stared into the dying embers, his mind drifting to memories he'd tried so hard to bury. The ghosts of his past whispered in the back of his mind, reminding him that some battles never truly end. The cartel's hideout was a crumbling two-story building on the edge of the city, an eyesore barely standing amidst the industrial wasteland. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Ricardo El Gato Mendoza, one of the cartel's mid-level enforcers, sat at a scarred wooden table, nursing a drink and reviewing surveillance photos spread before him. Among them was a grainy shot of Thomas Kane, taken earlier that morning by one of the men who had limped back to report their failed attempt at intimidation. "This guy," El Gato said, tapping the photo with a thick finger. "He's no regular bum. The way they described him, trained, dangerous." Around him, a group of 5 men listened in silence, their expressions ranging from curiosity to unease. One of them, a wiry man with a bandaged wrist, spat bitterly. "He's just a washed-up old man. We were caught off guard, that's all." "Ellie." Gatto's gaze snapped to the man, his voice cold. "You think a regular old man disarms 3 of my guys and leaves them crawling back here like wounded dogs? No, he's something else, and I don't like surprises." The room fell silent again as El Gato leaned back in his chair considering his next move. The cartel prided itself on projecting strength, and the notion of being bested, even briefly, by a lone figure was intolerable. After a moment he stood, his towering frame casting a shadow over the table. "We need to send a message," he said, his voice steady but menacing. "Get everyone together. We're going to pay this guy a visit. Tonight, if he's got a death wish, we'll oblige." Night fell quickly over the city, the orange glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the underpass where Kane had made his temporary camp. He sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, his back against a graffiti-streaked pillar. His fire had been rekindled, the flame small but steady, and his demeanor calm, though his senses remained razor-sharp. A faint sound caught his attention, the crunch of gravel underfoot. Faint but deliberate. Kane's eyes narrowed as he extinguished the fire with a swift kick of dirt. He slipped into the shadows, his movements silent and practiced. Years of survival in hostile territory had honed his instincts to a fine edge, and tonight those instincts were screaming. From the darkness, he watched as the cartel's convoy approached. 3 vehicles, their engines low and menacing, came to a stop just outside the underpass. Doors opened, and figures emerged, their silhouettes stark against the headlight. El Gato stepped forward, his bulk unmistakable, even from a distance. Behind him his men fanned out, weapons glinting in the dim light. "Hey, old man!" El Gato's voice echoed under the overpass, dripping with contempt. "We know you're here. Why don't you come out and make this easy on yourself?" Kane remained hidden, his mind racing. He counted 10 men, all armed. The odds were against him, but he'd faced worse. Carefully, he reached for his backpack, retrieving a length of paracord and a small improvised flashbang he'd crafted from scavenged materials. He'd hoped to avoid a confrontation like this, but the cartel had forced his hand. El Gato's patience wore thin. "You really want to play hide and seek? Fine. Spread out. Find him. And when you do, bring me his head." The men began to move, their footsteps echoing as they searched the shadows. Kane took a deep breath, centering himself. He'd need to move quickly and decisively. Waiting for the nearest thug to pass his position, Kane struck. A swift motion of the paracord looped around the man's neck, and with a silent, practiced efficiency, Kane incapacitated him, lowering the unconscious body to the ground. The second man barely had time to react before Kane's flashbang detonated, the blinding light and deafening noise throwing the group into chaos. Shouts and curses filled the air as Kane used the confusion to his advantage, moving like a phantom through the underpass. He disarmed one man with a precise strike to the wrist, sending the weapon skittering across the concrete, then followed up with a bone-jarring punch that left the thug crumpled on the ground. El Gato roared in anger, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get it together! He's just one man." But his men were panicking, firing wildly into the shadows as Kane continued his assault. He moved with surgical precision, each strike calculated to incapacitate without drawing unnecessary attention to himself. Years of experience had taught him the value of efficiency, and tonight that experience was on full display. Finally, it was just El Gato and one remaining enforcer. Kane stepped into the light, his face calm but his eyes hard as steel. The enforcer hesitated, his weapon shaking in his hands. "Drop it," Kane said, his voice low and commanding. The enforcer's resolve crumbled, and the weapon clattered to the ground as he raised his hands in surrender. Kane turned his attention to El Gato, who stood his ground, his jaw clenched in defiance. "You think you're untouchable?" Kane said, his tone cold. "You think you can prey on anyone without consequences? That ends now," El Gato sneered, pulling a knife from his belt. "You've got guts, old man. I'll give you that. But this is where your story ends." Kane tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Try me." The two men clashed, El Gato's brute strength against Kane's precision and skill. The fight was brutal, each blow landing with bone-crunching force. But Kane's training gave him the edge, and with a final, decisive move, he disarmed El Gato and brought him to his knees. Breathing heavily, Kane looked down at the defeated enforcer. "Tell your boss," he said, his voice like steel, "that this city isn't his playground anymore. If he comes after me, he won't live to regret it." With that, Kane turned and disappeared into the night, leaving El Gato kneeling amidst the ruins of his failed ambush, a broken man in a broken city. The city skyline was a jagged silhouette against the pre-dawn glow, and in the shadow of its imposing buildings, Thomas Kane moved like a ghost. He'd returned to the shelter of an abandoned warehouse, its cavernous interior filled with the echo of dripping water and the rustling of rats. The fight from the night before had left his body aching, but his resolve was sharper than ever. He set his pack down on a crate, pulling out the few supplies he'd managed to scrape together: a first aid kit, a roll of duct tape, and a small, weathered journal. Opening the journal, he skimmed through its pages, each one filled with hastily scrawled notes and sketches, maps of cartel movements, names of known enforcers, and locations of suspected safe houses. Kane had been watching them long before they decided to watch him. The previous night's ambush wasn't just an attack. It was a message. El Gato had made it clear the cartel wouldn't tolerate even the slightest challenge to their authority. But in their arrogance, they'd overlooked one crucial detail. Kane wasn't just any challenge. He was a man forged in fire, his survival instincts honed on battlefields where failure meant death. He leaned against the wall, his gaze falling to his hands. They were steady, but the faint tremor in his fingers betrayed the storm brewing within. Memories surfaced unbidden, the faces of his fallen comrades, the chaos of combat, and the hollow ache of coming home to a country that no longer felt like his own. The cartel had awakened something in him, something he'd tried to bury, and now there was no turning back. The sound of footsteps outside snapped Kane from his thoughts. He froze, his body tensing as his mind assessed the situation. The steps were light, deliberate, not the heavy shuffle of vagrants or the careless stride of thrill-seekers. This was someone trained, someone dangerous. Kane moved swiftly, extinguishing the small lantern that had been his only source of light. He melted into the shadows, his breathing controlled and silent. The warehouse door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Tall, lean, and dressed in dark tactical gear, the intruder scanned the room with a flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. Kane recognized the stance, the precision of the movement. Whoever this was, they weren't Cartel. They were something else entirely, and they were looking for him. Thomas Kane, the intruder, called out, their voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." Kane remained silent, his eyes tracking the flashlight's movements. The intruder paused, lowering the beam slightly. "You've made some powerful enemies," they continued. "The cartel wants your head, but I'm not with them. I'm here because I think we can help each other." Kane stepped forward, his presence materializing from the darkness like a wraith. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and edged with suspicion. The intruder turned, their flashlight revealing a woman in her late 30s with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. She holstered her weapon, raising her hand slightly in a gesture of peace. "My name's Elena Vega," she said. "I'm with the DEA." Kane's eyes narrowed. "I've got no interest in working with law enforcement. You might want to rethink that," Elena replied, her tone steady. "The cartel won't stop until you're dead, but with your skills and my resources, we can dismantle their operations piece by piece. You want to survive? This is your best shot." Kane studied her for a moment, weighing his options. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, but the stakes had changed. The cartel wasn't just a threat to him. They were a plague on the city, preying on the weak and silencing anyone who dared to resist. If he could take them down, maybe he'd find some semblance of redemption. "What's your plan?" he asked finally. Elena smiled faintly, lowering her hand. "First, we hit their supply lines, cut off their revenue, and their power starts to crumble. Then, we target their leadership. But I need your help to pull it off." Kane nodded slowly, his mind already piecing together strategies. "All right, but we do this my way. No red tape, no bureaucracy. Just results." "Deal," Elena said, extending a hand. Kane hesitated for a moment before shaking it, sealing an uneasy alliance. The road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Kane and Elena worked tirelessly, pooling their knowledge and resources to map out the cartel's operations. Elena provided intelligence gleaned from years of undercover work, while Kane used his military expertise to identify vulnerabilities and plan surgical strikes. Their first target was a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a hub for the cartel's drug shipments. Under the cover of darkness, they approached the facility, their movements synchronized and silent. Kane took point, his sharp eyes scanning for threats as they closed in on the perimeter. Inside, the warehouse was a hive of activity. Cartel members moved between stacks of crates, their laughter and shouted orders echoing in the cavernous space. Kane signaled for Elena to hold position as he crept closer, his every step deliberate and soundless. He spotted their objective, a shipping manifest detailing the routes and schedules of the cartel's drug transports. It was guarded by two men, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Kane moved like a shadow, dispatching them with swift, precise strikes before they could raise the alarm. Elena joined him, quickly photographing the documents and planting a tracker on one of the outbound shipments. They slipped away as quietly as they'd come, leaving no trace of their presence. Back at their makeshift base, they reviewed the data, their faces lit by the glow of a laptop screen. The manifest revealed a network of supply routes spanning the region, each one critical to the cartel's operations. "This is it," Elena said, her voice tinged with excitement. "We hit these routes, and we cripple their entire operation." Kane nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Then let's get to work." The cartel's response was swift and brutal. Word had spread quickly about the raid on their warehouse, and by the next evening, they were out in force, shaking down informants, intimidating anyone who might have been involved, and tightening their grip on the city's underworld. Kane and Elena monitored the fallout from their hidden vantage point, a cramped apartment with a clear view of a cartel's stronghold. "They're moving faster than I expected," Elena said, peering through a pair of binoculars. "We've rattled them, but now they're on high alert. We'll need to adapt." Kane sat nearby, cleaning and assembling a compact rifle with methodical precision. "Good," he replied without looking up. "Paranoia makes them sloppy. They'll start making mistakes." Elena lowered the binoculars, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "Sloppy or not, they're still dangerous. If they catch us, they won't," Kane said firmly, locking the rifle's bolt into place. "Stick to the plan." The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. Cripple the cartel's operations by systematically dismantling their infrastructure one piece at a time. Tonight, their target was a key distribution hub, a fee-based nightclub that doubled as a front for laundering money and moving product. The intel from the warehouse raid had revealed its importance, and taking it out would deal a significant blow to the cartel's cash flow. The nightclub was a pulsating, neon beacon in the heart of the city, its thumping bass line reverberating through the crowded streets. Outside, a line of patrons stretched down the block, their laughter and chatter blending with the urban symphony of car horns and distant sirens. Unbeknownst to them, the building was crawling with armed men, cartel enforcers mingling with the bum crowd or stationed discreetly at strategic points. Kane and Elena approached from a side alley, blending into the shadows. Kane's attire was nondescript, a dark jacket and jeans, but his demeanor radiated purpose. Elena carried a small duffel bag, its contents carefully chosen for the night's mission. "Security looks tight," Elena murmured, her eyes scanning. "The bouncers at the entrance and the guards patrolling the rooftop." "It always does," Kane replied, slipping a suppressed pistol into his waistband. "We're not going through the front door." They moved along the alley until they reached a fire escape. Kane tested the ladder, his grip firm as he pulled himself up. Elena followed, the two ascending silently until they reached the roof. From their vantage point, they could see the building's layout, the guards' patrol patterns, and the glowing skylights that offered a glimpse into the chaos below. "There," Kane said, pointing to a vent that led into the building's ventilation system. "That's our way in." Elena nodded, pulling a small toolkit from her bag. She worked quickly, removing the vent cover and securing a line for their descent. Kane went first, lowering himself into the darkness with practiced ease. The narrow duct echoed with the faint hum of the nightclub's music, growing louder as they neared their destination. They emerged in a storage room filled with crates of alcohol and supplies. Kane checked the door, his ears straining for any sound on the other side. Satisfied, he motioned for Elena to follow as they slipped into the hallway. The corridor was dimly lit, the walls vibrating faintly with the bass line from the club. They moved quickly and silently, avoiding the guards as they made their way to the office where the club's manager conducted the cartel's business. Kane paused outside the door, his hand raised to signal Elena to stop. "Two inside," he whispered. After listening for a moment, "Armed," Elena nodded, drawing a compact taser from her bag. Kane opened the door swiftly, catching the two men off guard. The first barely had time to react before Elena's taser dropped him to the floor, convulsing. Kane closed the distance to the second, delivering a precise strike to his temple that left him unconscious. They moved quickly, searching the office for anything of value. Elena found a safe hidden behind a cheap painting, while Kane located a ledger detailing the club's illicit operations. "This is it," Elena said, cracking the safe and pulling out stacks of cash, a hard drive, and several passports. "This will hurt them." "Let's make sure it does," Kane replied, taking a small incendiary device from his jacket. He set it on the desk, its timer ticking down as they exited the room. The explosion was contained but effective, destroying the office and its contents while triggering the building's fire alarms. Patrons began to panic, flooding the exits as smoke filled the air. Kane and Elena slipped out with the crowd, their expressions calm amidst the chaos. By the time the cartel realized what had happened, it was too late. The nightclub was compromised, its secrets exposed, and its reputation as a safe haven shattered. Kane and Elena watched from a distance as emergency vehicles converged on the scene, their faces illuminated by the flashing light. "One step closer," Elena said, her voice resolute. Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the burning building. "They'll come after us harder now. We need to stay ahead." "We will," Elena replied. "They don't know it yet, but they're already losing." As the sirens wailed and the smoke rose into the night sky, Kane and Elena melted back into the shadows, ready to strike again. The morning after the nightclub raid, the city seemed eerily quiet, but Kane knew better. The calm was a mask, stretched thin over the chaos brewing beneath the surface. He sat in a dingy diner on the outskirts of town, the smell of burnt coffee and fried food mingling with the low hum of conversation. Across the table, Elena scrolled through her phone, her expression grim. "They've put a price on your head," she said, setting the device down. "It's already circulating through their networks, $100,000 for anyone who brings you in, alive or dead." Kane took a sip of his coffee, unbothered. "Let them come. It'll save us the trouble of finding them." Elena frowned, leaning forward. "This isn't a game." "Kane, they're desperate now, which makes them unpredictable. We need to be smarter than they are." "We will be," Kane replied, his voice calm. "What's our next target?" Elena pulled out a folded map, spreading it across the table. She pointed to a location marked with a red circle. "Here, a shipping yard on the river. They use it to move drugs and weapons out of the city. If we take it out, we'll choke off one of their main supply lines." Kane studied the map, his mind already piecing together a plan. "Security?" tight, Elena admitted. Cameras, armed guards, and they've got patrol boats on the water, but there's a weak spot here. She tapped the northern edge of the yard. Less coverage. If we can get in through the maintenance gate, we'll have a shot at planting charges on their supply containers, Kane nodded. We'll need to move fast. Once they realize we're there, the whole place will lock down. Elena folded the map, her resolve clear. Then let's make sure they don't see us coming. Night fell over the shipping yard, the air heavy with the scent of oil and salt water. The yard was a maze of towering containers, their hulking forms casting long shadows under the floodlights. From their vantage point on a nearby rooftop, Kane and Elena surveyed the scene, each movement below scrutinized with the precision of seasoned operatives. 2 guards at the main gate, Elena whispered, her binoculars trained on the entrance. Another patrol near the docks. Cameras on the southwest and east perimeters. We'll need to disable those first. Kane adjusted the strap on his pack, which contained an array of tools and explosives. I'll handle the cameras. You cover me from here. Elena handed him a compact earpiece. Stay in contact. If anything goes sideways, I'll create a distraction. Kane smirked. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. He descended from the rooftop with practiced ease, blending into the shadows as he approached the perimeter. Moving with the silence of a predator, he reached the first camera. A quick splice of the wiring rendered it useless. He repeated the process with the second, then the third, his movements efficient and deliberate. Cameras are down, he whispered into the earpiece. Copy that, Elena replied. The maintenance gate is clear. You're good to go. Kane slipped through the gate, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The yard was alive with activity, forklifts and trucks weaving between rows of containers, but the chaos provided cover, allowing him to move undetected. He reached the first container marked with a cartel symbol and began planting charges along its base. First charge set, he reported, moving to the next. As he worked, a faint sound caught his attention, the crunch of gravel underfoot. He froze, his hand hovering over the detonator. Slowly he turned, his eyes narrowing as a guard emerged from around the corner, a flashlight cutting through the darkness. Kane moved swiftly, closing the distance before the guard could react. A single precise strike rendered the man unconscious, his body slumping to the ground. Kane dragged him behind a stack of containers, ensuring he wouldn't be found until it was too late. Had a close call, he murmured into the earpiece. Second charge is set. On to the third. Elena's voice crackled back. Hurry, patrols are shifting. You've got a window, but it's closing fast. Kane quickened his pace, planting the remaining charges with the precision of a man who'd done this countless times before. By the time he set the final one, the faint sound of voices reached his ears. A patrol was approaching, their flashlights bobbing in the distance. Charges are set, he whispered. Exfil now. He slipped back through the yard, keeping low. As he avoided the patrols, Elena watched from her vantage point, her finger hovering over the trigger of a sniper rifle she'd set up as insurance. When Kane finally emerged from the shadows, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Nice work, she said, as he climbed back onto the rooftop. Kane nodded, taking the detonator from his pack. Let's light it up. With the press of a button, a series of explosions ripped through the yard, the fiery blasts illuminating the night sky. Containers shattered, their contents consumed by the inferno. Alarms blared, and the yard descended into chaos as workers and guards scrambled to contain the destruction. From their rooftop perch, Kane and Elena watched the carnage unfold, their faces lit by the flickering flames. Another piece off the board, Elena said, her voice steady. Kane's gaze remained fixed on the burning yard. And one step closer to the king. As the fire raged below, the 2 operatives disappeared into the night, leaving the cartel to reckon with the aftermath of their assault. The cartel's retaliation came faster than Kane or Elena had anticipated. By dawn, the streets were alive with tension, and the cartel's enforcers were out in a force. Rumors spread like wildfire through the city. The mysterious attackers who had leveled the shipping yard were now marked for death, with every affiliate ordered to hunt them down. Kane stood in the middle of a small garage on the edge of town, its corrugated metal walls rattling faintly in the morning breeze. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and an old beaten truck sat in the corner. Elena paced nearby, her phone in hand, as she monitored the chatter across their encrypted channels. They're tightening their net, she said, her voice edged with urgency. Roadblocks on all the major exits, patrols sweeping through neighborhoods. They're not leaving anything to chance. Kane finished loading a duffel bag with gear, his movements calm despite the escalating danger. Good, he said. They're spreading themselves thin. The more they focus on finding us, the less they're protecting their assets. Elena stopped pacing, staring at him. This isn't sustainable. We're 2 people against an entire organization. Sooner or later, they'll catch up. Not if we keep them on the back foot, Kane replied. He hoisted the bag over his shoulder and glanced at her. What's the next move? Elena hesitated before pulling out a folded document from her jacket pocket. I've been holding onto this for a while. It's a list of safe houses the cartel uses to store cash, weapons, and documents. Hitting one of these could cripple them, but it's risky. They're bound to be heavily guarded. Kane took the paper and studied it, his eyes scanning the neatly written addresses. One in particular caught his attention. This one, he said, pointing to an address on the outskirts of the city. Remote, limited escape routes, but it's close enough to their central operations that they'll feel the loss. It's also their most secure, Elena warned. We're going to need more than a few tricks to pull this off. Then, we'd better get started, Kane said, a faint smirk crossing his lips. The sun had set by the time they reached the safe house, a sprawling compound hidden behind tall fences and surrounded by dense woodland. Through binoculars, Elena counted at least a dozen guards patrolling the grounds, their silhouettes moving methodically under the glare of floodlights. This is going to be a nightmare, she muttered, lowering the binoculars. What's the plan? Kane unfolded a rough sketch of the compound he'd drawn from memory based on their intel. We create chaos, he said, pointing to key areas on the map. Take out their power, hit their armory, and block their exits. Once they're scrambling, we go for the main house and get what we need. Elena raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of moving parts for two people. It'll work, Kane replied confidently. Stick to the plan, and we'll be out before they even know what hit them. They moved swiftly, their dark clothing blending seamlessly into the shadows. Kane handled the perimeter guards with quiet efficiency, his movements fluid and lethal. Elena followed close behind, her sharp eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. At the edge of the compound, they found the power station. Kane rigged a small explosive to the generator, setting a timer for 2 minutes. Let's move, he whispered. As they approached the armory, the explosion rocked the compound, plunging it into darkness. Shouts echoed through the air as guards scrambled to respond, their flashlights cutting frantic paths through the night. Using the chaos as cover, Kane and Elena breached the armory, disabling the lone guard inside before he could raise the alarm. Kane set another charge among the racks of weapons and crates of ammunition, while Elena grabbed a handful of grenades and spare magazines. This is going to make a hell of a statement, she said, her voice laced with grim satisfaction. They moved toward the main house, their path illuminated only by the faint glow of the fires spreading from the armory. The compound was in full panic mode, guards shouting orders and firing blindly into the darkness. Kane and Elena used the confusion to their advantage, slipping through the chaos undetected. Inside the main house, they found a treasure trove of intel, ledgers, USB drives, and maps detailing the cartel's operation. Elena worked quickly, photographing the documents and downloading files onto a portable drive. We've got what we need, she said. Let's go. As they exited the house, a spotlight snapped on, bathing them in blinding light. Intruders! A voice bellowed. Run! Kane shouted, pulling Elena toward the tree line. Bullets tore through the air around them, but they kept moving, their years of training guiding their every step. They reached the cover of the trees just as another explosion erupted behind them, the armory's destruction sending a fireball into the sky. By the time they reached their vehicle, parked a safe distance away, the compound was in ruins. Elena collapsed into the passenger seat, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Kane started the engine, his expression calm, but his grip on the wheel tight. They're going to come at us with everything they have, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Let them, Kane replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. We're not done yet. As the vehicle disappeared into the night, the cartel safe house burned, a symbol of the chaos Kane and Elena had unleashed and a warning of what was still to come. Dawn broke over the city, painting the horizon in hues of orange and purple. In a small, nondescript motel room on the edge of town, Kane and Elena worked tirelessly, the air thick with the hum of their determination. The table before them was cluttered with laptops, maps, and the stolen intel from the safe house raid. Despite the relentless pace, neither showed signs of stopping. Elena leaned over a map, tracing a line with her finger. This route here, she said, takes them through the industrial district. It's their main supply line for moving cash out of the city. If we intercept one of their convoys, we can deal a serious blow to their finances. Kane nodded, his focus on the laptop screen where he scrolled through encrypted files. And if we're lucky, we might also flush out some of their higher-ups. They won't let a major shipment go unprotected. Elena's phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening. They've put out another bounty, 500,000 this time. They're escalating. Kane didn't look up. Let them. The bigger the bounty, the more reckless they'll get. Elena exhaled, sharply, sitting back in her chair. We're running out of time, Kane. Every move we make pushes them closer to finding us. We need to hit harder, faster. Agreed, Kane replied. He closed the laptop and turned to her, his expression unreadable. We'll hit the convoy tonight, but we do it smart. Minimal exposure, maximum damage. Night fell, and the industrial district transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and steel. The convoy rolled through the deserted streets, a procession of black SUVs flanked by armored truck. Their engines growled low, a sound that carried a weight of authority and menace. Inside one of the vehicles, a cartel lieutenant sat with a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. Kane and Elena waited in the shadows, their preparations meticulous. Elena perched on a rooftop with a sniper rifle, her scope trained on the lead vehicle. Kane crouched near the road, his eyes fixed on the convoy's approach. He adjusted the detonator in his hand, the device wired to an explosive hidden beneath the asphalt. They're coming up on the kill zone. Elena's voice crackled in his earpiece. Ready? Ready, Kane replied. The lead SUV reached the designated point, its headlights slicing through the darkness. Kane pressed the detonator and the explosion tore through the street, flipping the vehicle onto its roof. The convoy screeched to a halt as chaos erupted, the guards scrambling to respond. Elena fired, her shot precise. The driver of the second SUV slumped over the wheel, and the vehicle swerved, crashing into a lamppost. Kane moved swiftly, using the confusion to his advantage. He emerged from the shadows, dispatching the nearest guard with a brutal efficiency that left no room for error. Move! Elena's voice urged through the earpiece. They're regrouping! Kane advanced on the armored truck, his every movement calculated. He tossed a smoke grenade, the billowing cloud disorienting the guards as he reached the rear doors. With a crowbar, he pried them open, revealing stacks of cash and crates of weapons inside. Elena provided cover, her shots precise and unrelenting. Each pull of the trigger was a calculated move, her training evident in the way she kept the cartel's forces pinned down. Kane worked quickly, setting charges inside the truck before retreating into the shadows. Charges set, he said into the earpiece. Clear out. Elena packed up her rifle, moving with practiced efficiency. She rendezvoused with Kane just as the first reinforcements arrived, their shouts echoing through the industrial district. The pair slipped away, the darkness their alley as they put distance between themselves and the convoy. Moments later, the charges detonated, a fiery explosion that consumed the truck and its contents. The shock wave rattled nearby buildings, and the glow of the flames painted the night sky in shades of orange and red. From a safe vantage point, Kane and Elena watched the aftermath. The convoy lay in ruins, the cartel's forces scattered and disoriented. That's going to hurt them, Elena said, lowering her binoculars. Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant flames. And send a message, we're not backing down. As sirens wailed in the distance, the two turned and disappeared. Into the night, their mission far from over, but their resolve unshaken. The cartel's response was a declaration of war. By midday, the city buzzed with tension. Cartel vehicles prowled the streets, their occupants scanning for any hint of Kane and Elena. Informants whispered in dark corners, desperate to trade scraps of information for a chance at the mounting bounty. Fear rippled through the underworld as the cartel's enforcers issued brutal warnings to anyone suspected of aiding their elusive prey. In a cramped safe house on the outskirts of the city, Kane and Elena worked against the clock. The room was Spartan, lit by a single bulb that cast harsh shadows on the peeling wallpaper. A map of the city was spread across the table, dotted with marks and annotations. Elena's laptop hummed faintly, displaying intercepted communications that painted a grim picture of the cartel's escalating efforts. They're tightening the noose, Elena said, her tone clipped. Every major road out of the city has a checkpoint. They're even running facial recognition at the bus and train stations. Kane leaned over the map, tracing potential escape routes with his finger. Then, We don't go through the city. We go under it. Elena looked up, frowning. The old sewer tunnels? They're a maze, and half of them are collapsed. Exactly why they won't expect it, Kane replied. It'll buy us time to regroup. Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened. We've got a bigger problem. They've put out an emergency call to all their lieutenants. They're gathering at a compound just outside the city, probably to plan their next move. Kane's eyes narrowed. Then we hit them before they hit us. The compound was a fortress. Nestled in the foothills, it was surrounded by high walls and guarded by a small army. Floodlights swept the perimeter, illuminating the rows of parked vehicles and the armed. Men who patrolled with practiced vigilance. From their vantage point on a nearby ridge, Kane and Elena studied the scene through binoculars. This isn't going to be like the other raids, Elena said. They're expecting trouble. Kane lowered the binoculars, his expression unreadable. Good. That means they're distracted. We'll use that. Elena raised an eyebrow. You've got a plan? Always. Under the cover of darkness, they descended the ridge and approached the compound from its blind spot, a narrow ravine, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. Kane led the way, his movements silent and deliberate. They reached the base of the wall, where Elena pulled a small drone from her pack. She guided it over the wall, its camera feeding a live view. To her phone, main building has at least 24 guards, she murmured. But there's a weak point on the east side, minimal coverage and a service entrance. That's our way in, Kane said. He produced a grappling hook and secured it to the wall, scaling it with practiced ease. Elena followed, and within minutes they were inside the compound. The service entrance led to a maintenance corridor, dimly lit and deserted. Kane checked the corners, his senses honed for any sign of danger. Clear, let's move. They navigated the maze-like interior, avoiding patrols and security cameras. Their target was a conference room on the second floor, where the cartel's lieutenants were reportedly meeting. As they climbed the stairs, the muffled sound of voices grew louder. Kane paused outside the door, listening. 4 inside, armed. Elena nodded, pulling a flashbang from her pack. On your signal. Kane counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. Elena tossed the flashbang into the room, the explosion of light and sound disorienting the occupants. Kane burst in, his weapon drawn, and neutralized the first 2 targets with precise shot. Elena followed, taking down a third as the fourth scrambled for cover. Kane advanced, disarming and incapacitating the final man with a swift, brutal efficiency. The room fell silent save for the groans of the wounded. Elena quickly gathered documents and devices from the table, while Kane secured the area. This is everything, Elena said, stuffing the intel into her bag. Let's go before reinforcements show up. As they retraced their steps, an alarm blared, and the compound erupted into chaos. Guards shouted orders, and the sound of boots echoed through the halls. Kane and Elena picked up their pace, their exit now a race against time. They reached the wall just as searchlights swept the area. Kane boosted Elena over before pulling himself up. Shots rang out, but they disappeared into the ravine before the guards could close in. Breathing heavily, they regrouped at their vehicle parked miles away. Elena leaned against the hood, her adrenaline fading. That was close. Kane nodded, starting the engine. Too close, but we got what we needed. As they drove into the night, the compound's floodlights faded into the distance, replaced by the stars overhead. The war was far from over, but tonight they had won another battle. The Cartel's intel network buzzed with fury as news of the compound assault spread. Kane and Elena had hit them hard, and the organization's upper ranks scrambled to assess the damage. Within hours, the cartel deployed every resource at its disposal, flooding the city with enforcers and issuing orders to hunt the pair down at all costs. In a derelict factory on the outskirts of town, Kane and Elena regrouped. The massive, rusting structure provided a temporary sanctuary, its towering walls and labyrinthine interior shielding them from prying eyes. A makeshift command center was set up in a corner where Elena sorted through the intel they had stolen from the compound. This is big, she murmured, flipping through the files. Supply routes, bank accounts, safe house locations. It's all here. We could dismantle their entire operation. Kane leaned against a metal pillar, his arms crossed. Then we need to move fast. The longer we stay here, the more likely they'll find us. Elena nodded but hesitated. There's something else. These files mention a shipment, something big. It's coming in tonight at the docks. What is it? Kane asked, his tone sharpening. Doesn't say. Elena admitted. "But it's high priority. If we intercept it, we might gain even more leverage." Kane considered this, his mind calculating the risk. "All right, we hit the docks, but we do it clean. No unnecessary risk." The docks sprawled along the waterfront, a hive of activity even under the cover of darkness. Cranes moved cargo containers with mechanical precision, and workers shouted to one another over the hum of engines and crashing wave. The cartel's presence was unmistakable. Armed guards patrolled the area, their eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. Kane and Elena observed from a vantage point atop a nearby warehouse. Through her binoculars, Elena spotted the target, a shipping container marked with the cartel's emblem, flanked by 2 SUVs and a group of heavily armed men. "There it is," she said. "They've got it locked down tight." Kane adjusted the strap of his backpack, which contained an assortment of gear for the mission. "We'll need to create a diversion," he said. "Draw their attention away from the container." Elena smirked. "Leave that to me." Minutes later, a series of small explosions erupted on the far side of the docks, sending workers and guards scrambling. Panic spread quickly as fire alarms blared and chaos unfolded. Taking advantage of the distraction, Kane descended from the rooftop, moving with the stealth of a predator. He weaved through the maze of shipping containers, his every step calculated and silent. Reaching the target, he crouched behind a stack of crates, assessing the remaining guards. 2 men stood near the container, their attention divided as they barked orders into their radios. Kane struck swiftly, neutralizing one guard with a chokehold, before disarming the other with a precise strike to the wrist. Both men crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Kane pulled a crowbar from his pack and pried open the container's doors. Inside, rows of crates lined the walls, each marked with cryptic symbols. Kane opened one, revealing a cache of high-powered weapons. Another crate contained bricks of cash, neatly bundled and stamped with foreign bank seals. But it was the final crate that caught his attention. Inside was a black case, sleek and ominous. He opened it to find vials of a clear liquid nestled in protective foam. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, retrieving one of the vials. Elena's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Kane, you need to move. Reinforcements are inbound." "Copy." "That," Kane replied, carefully securing the vial in his pack. He planted a charge inside the container before slipping back into the shadows. The diversion had done its job, but the cartel was beginning to regroup. As Kane retreated, he rendezvoused with Elena near their exfiltration point. She was crouched behind a stack of pallets, her rifle trained on the chaos below. "Got what we need?" she asked. Kane nodded. "Weapons, cash, and something else. Something big. I'll explain later. Let's go." They slipped away just as the charges detonated, the explosion rocking the docks and lighting up the night sky. The container and its contents were obliterated, leaving the cartel scrambling to salvage what they could. Back at the factory, Kane placed the vial on the table under the harsh light of a desk lamp. Elena leaned in, studying it with a frown. "What is it?" she asked. "I don't know," Kane admitted. "But whatever it is, it's important enough for them to guard it like their lives depended on it." Elena straightened, her expression resolute. "Then we find out, and we use it to bring them down." As the night deepened, the vial sat between them, a silent testament to the escalating stakes of their war against the cartel. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the skyline, Kane and Elena sat huddled in their makeshift command center, the vial of clear liquid sitting ominously between them. The tension was palpable. Elena had spent the better part of the night analyzing the data they'd recovered, her laptop displaying a flurry of encrypted files and chemical schematics. "It's a weapon," she said finally, breaking the silence. "A bioweapon, to be exact. These vials, they contain a synthesized pathogen, airborne, highly contagious, and designed for rapid deployment." Kane's expression darkened. "How bad are we talking?" Elena leaned back, her exhaustion evident. "Bad. If this gets released in a populated area, we're looking at hundreds, maybe thousands of casualties within hours. This isn't just cartel business anymore. It's terrorism." Kane stood and began pacing, his mind racing through the implications. "Who are they selling it to?" "That's the missing piece," Elena admitted, "but I found a lead." She turned the laptop toward him, displaying an email thread pulled from the cartel's servers. "There's a meeting scheduled at a private airstrip 2 nights from now. The buyer's coming in to finalize the deal. Then we intercept it," Kane said firmly. "We stop this before it goes any further." The private airstrip was nestled in a remote valley, surrounded by dense forests and accessible by a single dirt road. Kane and Elena arrived under the cover of darkness, parking their vehicle a mile away and continuing on foot. The night was quiet, save for the faint hum of a generator in the distance and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Through her binoculars, Elena surveyed the airstrip. A sleek private jet sat on the tarmac, flanked by two black SUVs. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements disciplined and methodical. "They're expecting trouble," she murmured. "This isn't just any deal. Whoever the buyer is, they're big enough to make the cartel nervous." Kane adjusted his pack, his voice calm but resolute. "Then we make sure they don't leave with what they came for." Elena handed him a small earpiece. "I'll cover you from here. Get close, plant the charges, and signal me when you're clear." Kane nodded and disappeared into the shadows, his movements silent and precise. He navigated the perimeter, avoiding the guards and using the terrain to his advantage. Reaching the edge of the tarmac, he crouched behind a stack of fuel drums, his eyes locked on the SUVs. The buyer emerged from one of the vehicles, a tall figure in a tailored suit. Even from a distance, his air of authority was unmistakable. A briefcase handcuffed to his wrist gleamed under the floodlights as he approached the cartel's representative, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek. Kane's voice crackled in Elena's earpiece. "Visual on the buyer. Moving into position." "Copy that," Elena replied. "Guards are shifting their patrols. You've got a 5-minute window." Kane slipped closer, using the shadows cast by the jet's wings to stay hidden. He reached the rear SUV and attached a small explosive to its undercarriage. Moving to the jet, he planted another charge near the landing gear. Each movement was deliberate, his training evident in the efficiency of his actions. As he worked, the conversation between the buyer and the cartel representative grew heated. Snippets of their exchange reached Kane's ears. "This delay is unacceptable," the buyer snapped, his voice icy. "My clients do not tolerate incompetence." The cartel man's tone was equally sharp. "We've delivered on our end. The WAMU product is here. If you want it, pay up." Kane finished planting the final charge and retreated to a safe distance. "Charges are set," he whispered. "Ready when you are." "Hold position," Elena said. "Let's see how this plays out." The argument continued, tensions escalating. Finally, the buyer relented, handing over a USB drive along with his briefcase. The cartel man opened it, revealing stacks of crisp bills. "We've seen enough," Elena said. "Take them out." Kane pressed the detonator. The explosions were simultaneous and devastating. The SUV erupted in flames, sending guards scrambling for cover while the jet's landing gear crumpled, grounding the aircraft. Kane moved quickly, taking out the disoriented guards with precision. Elena provided cover fire from her perch, picking off targets with deadly accuracy. The buyer attempted to flee, but Kane intercepted him, disarming him with a swift strike. "Who are you working for?" Kane demanded, pinning the man to the ground. The buyer smirked, blood dripping from his lip. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Kane's grip tightened. "Try me." Before the man could answer, a bullet whizzed past Kane's head, forcing him to dive for cover. A second wave of guards had arrived, and the firefight intensified. "We're out of time," Elena shouted over the comms. "Fall back." Kane reluctantly released the buyer, retreating under a hail of gunfire. He regrouped with Elena, and the two disappeared into the forest as reinforcements swarmed the airstrip. Back at their safe house, Kane slammed his fist on the table. "We were so close." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "We stopped the deal and destroyed their shipment. That's a win." Kane exhaled, his anger simmering. "It's not enough. We need to find out who's behind this." Elena nodded, determination hardening her features. "And we will. But for now, we regroup. This fight isn't over." As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, the vial of clear liquid sat on the table, a grim reminder of the stakes they faced and the battles yet to come. The storm rolled in just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a chaotic blend of darkness and rain. Lightning illuminated the jagged skyline, and thunder rattled the glass of high-rise buildings. For Kane and Elena, the weather was a mixed blessing. It offered cover, but it also brought unpredictability to an already dangerous mission. They were holed up in a decrepit parking garage overlooking the city's financial district. Kane adjusted the suppressor on his rifle, while Elena reviewed the plans spread across the hood of their car. The latest intel pointed to a critical meeting happening in the penthouse of a nearby skyscraper. It wasn't just any meeting, it was a gathering of the cartel's regional leaders. "All of them in one place," Elena said, her voice barely audible over the rain pounding on the concrete. "This is our shot to take out their entire command structure." Kane's gaze remained fixed on the building, It's a fortress, he said. Armed guards, restricted access, and God knows what kind of security inside. We're going to need a way in that they won't see coming. Elena smirked, tapping a USB drive against the plans. That's where this comes in. It's a backdoor into their building's security system. If we can get close enough to jack into their network, I can take out the cameras and unlock the elevators. How close? Kane asked. The building? Next door, she replied. Their server room is on the 30th floor. If we can get to it, I can do the rest remotely. Kane nodded. All right, we go in quiet. No alarms, no mistakes. The rain intensified as they approached the adjacent building. Drenched but undeterred, they scaled the fire escape, their movements swift and coordinated. At the 30th floor, they pried open a maintenance hatch and slipped inside, finding themselves in a dimly lit corridor lined with humming server racks. Elena wasted no time. She plugged the USB drive into a terminal and began typing furiously. Give me 2 minutes, she said, her eyes glued to the screen. Kane kept watch, his rifle trained on the door. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly, and his grip tightened. We've got company, he warned. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. Almost there. The door creaked open, and a guard stepped in, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Kane moved like a shadow, disarming and subduing the man before he could make a sound. He dragged the unconscious guard into a corner and resumed his post. Done, Elena whispered, disconnecting the USB drive. Cameras are down, and the elevators are unlocked. Let's move. They retraced their steps, slipping back into the rain-soaked night. Crossing the gap between the buildings required precision and nerves of steel. Kane led the way, traversing a narrow catwalk as the wind howled around them. Elena followed, her heart pounding with every step. Inside the Cartel skyscraper, the atmosphere was starkly different. The opulent lobby and high-tech security systems contrasted sharply with the storm raging outside. Kane and Elena navigated the corridors with practiced ease, avoiding guards and security checkpoints as they made their way to the penthouse. The elevator ride was silent but charged with tension. When the doors opened, they stepped into a lavish conference room, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the storm-lit city. Around the table sat 6 men, their faces hardened by years of crime and power. Elena's voice was a whisper. That's all of them, Kane nodded, his expression unreadable. On my mark. Before the Cartel leaders could react, Kane and Elena launched their assault. Flashbangs erupted, filling the room with blinding light and deafening noise. Kane moved with precision, taking down targets with calculated efficiency, while Elena provided cover, her shots precise and unrelenting. The chaos was over in seconds. The Cartel leaders lay incapacitated or dead, their reign of terror brought to a swift end. Elena secured the room, gathering documents and electronic devices, while Kane ensured no one could call for help. We did it, Elena said, her voice tinged with relief. Not yet, Kane replied, his gaze fixed on a laptop displaying encrypted files. This is only part of the puzzle. We need to find out who's supplying them with the bioweapons. Elena nodded, downloading the files. Then we'd better move. Reinforcements won't be far behind. As they exited the penthouse, the storm reached its peak, lightning illuminating their path and thunder drowning out the sound of their escape. For a moment the city seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the shift in power. Kane and Elena disappeared into the night, their mission far from over, but their resolve stronger than ever. The rain had subsided by morning, leaving the city drenched and quiet, as if the storm had washed away some of its sins. For Kane and Elena, however, there was no time to rest. Back at their safe house, the laptop retrieved from the penthouse took center stage, its encrypted files holding the key to unraveling the Cartel's darkest secrets. Elena's fingers danced across the keyboard, her brow furrowed in concentration. Almost there, she muttered, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Kane stood nearby, his gaze fixed on the door. His body was still, but his mind was racing. The penthouse assault had been a victory, but it had also drawn unwanted attention. Every second they stayed in one place increased the risk of discovery. Got it, Elena announced, sitting back with a triumphant smile. The screen displayed a list of transactions, locations, and name, a web of connections that stretched far beyond the Cartel's regional operations. This is it, she said, scrolling through the data. Bank accounts offshore, shipments routed through shell companies, and here, she paused, highlighting a name, the supplier. Dmitry Volkov. Kane stepped closer, his eyes narrowing at the name. Russian arms dealer. I've crossed paths with his type before. If he's involved, this operation's bigger than we thought. There's more, Elena said, pointing to a location. He's here, a private estate outside the city. Looks like he's overseeing the next phase of the operation personally, Kane nodded, his resolve hardening. Then that's where we end this. Volkov's estate was a sprawling compound nestled in the hills, surrounded by dense forest and protected by layers of security. Kane and Elena approached under the cover of darkness, their gear optimized for stealth. From a vantage point overlooking the estate, they surveyed the layout. Perimeter patrols every 5 minutes, Kane observed, watching through binoculars. Cameras on the main gate and the east wing. Heavy guard presence near the central building. Elena adjusted her earpiece. We split up. I'll handle the cameras and create a distraction on the west side. You go straight for Volkov. Kane glanced at her. It'll be dangerous, she smirked. When isn't it? They moved swiftly, Kane slipping through the shadows toward the central building while Elena infiltrated the security hub. As she disabled cameras and planted explosives to divert the guards, Kane breached the estate's main structure, his movements precise and silent. Inside, the opulence was staggering. Gilded fixtures, marble floors, and priceless artwork adorned every corner, but Kane's focus remained unshaken. Guided by the intel, he navigated toward Volkov's office. The door was ajar, and inside, Volkov stood with his back to Kane, speaking into a phone in rapid Russian. Kane stepped inside, his weapon trained on the arms dealer. End the call, Kane said, his voice cold. Volkov turned slowly, a sly smile spreading across his face. Ah, the infamous Mr. Kane. I've heard about you. Then you know how this ends, Kane replied. Volkov chuckled, placing the phone down. You're bold, I'll give you that. But you're out of your depth. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? A dead man, Kane said, stepping closer. Before Volkov could respond, an explosion rocked the compound. Elena's diversion had begun. Volkov's smirk faltered as alarms blared and the sound of gunfire echoed through the estate. Your men are busy, Kane said, his tone steely. It's over. Volkov's hand darted toward a concealed pistol, but Kane was faster. A single shot rang out, and Volkov collapsed to the floor. Kane approached the desk, searching for anything that might tie up loose ends. Among the papers and devices, he found a hard drive marked with a symbol he recognized, an international syndicate, with reach far beyond the cartel. Kane, we've got to move! Elena's voice crackled in his earpiece. The place is crawling with reinforcements. On my way, he replied, securing the drive and exiting the office. The compound was in chaos, guards scrambling to contain the fires and explosions Elena had orchestrated. Kane fought his way through, his movements efficient and deadly. He reunited with Elena at the extraction point, both of them bloodied but alive. As they sped away from the burning estate, Elena glanced at Kane. Did we get what we needed? Kane held up the drive, his expression grim. Enough to keep going, but this isn't just about the cartel anymore. We're dealing with something much bigger. Elena nodded, determination in her eyes. Then we take it down, piece by piece. The city lights faded into the distance as they drove into the night, their mission far from over, but their resolve unshaken. Together, they had become a force the shadows would not soon forget.